much for allowing me to give a brief overview of the ICAP theory so that we can have more understanding in our discussion session about rethinking how to teach based on how students learn, translating theory into practice. So I'm going to be doing 2 clicks, so it may be a little bit awkward for a while. Okay. Wait a minute. Is it on already? Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Okay, I'll just skip the first one. Okay. Lecturing has been, teaching by telling, has been around for over 900 years. Unfortunately, it persists to today, and generally it's about 65% for online learning courses and well over 55% in STEM classes. There was a very carefully study done that looked at all the STEM classes. Why active learning is not, wait, before we get there. So but the problem with lecturing is that students don't learn very well. The most persuasive evidence came from a meta-analysis done in 2014 of 225 STEM classes. And in that meta-analysis, they found that when you're in the learning outcome of a passive classroom is 50%, and that translates to 68% when you're in a no-lecture active learning classroom. Likewise, failure rate reduces from 34% from a lecturing passive classroom to no lecture active classroom. So the question becomes, why isn't active classroom implemented everywhere universally? The reason is that it's not implemented because it's not prescriptive. Currently, active classroom is defined by default, that is, it's no lecturing, but doesn't tell us exactly how to implement it. It has been implemented when people do it simply by having students work in groups or in pairs, just because in groups people are more active. But working in groups and pairs is only effective if students collaborate in a co-generative way, which I will define in a second. To solve the lack of prescription problem, I propose a theory of active learning that you've heard about based on how students learn called ICAP. How students learn typically refers to students' thinking processes, which we cannot observe. ICAP's assumption is that perhaps students' thinking processes can be categorized into 4 groups that may correspond to 4 types of visible engaging with instruction behavior, along with their visible outputs. So engaging behavior refers to what students do, say, write, and produce during instruction while they're trying to learn. So this is an important last point. The need to focus on overt visible engagement behaviors as a proxy for thinking processes is that ICAP can then provide concrete definitions to facilitate how active learning classroom can be defined and implemented. I'm going to get a drink of water. Okay, the acronym ICAP that you've already heard about stands for interactive, constructive, active, and passive. So it basically refers to 4 ways that people can interact with instruction or instruction information. Each mode can be characterized by physical behavior and the output produced. Those are the 2 main characteristics. I'm going to give you some examples. So when you're in passive mode, you're really paying attention, such as listening to a lecture or watching a video, and you produce no outputs. Unfortunately, this is the mode most instructors try to achieve, just to have students pay attention. The next mode is the active mode, and the characteristic definition is you manipulate instruction materials without producing anything. Okay, what do I mean? So, for example, you could be highlighting, underlining sentences. You haven't produced anything, you just manipulated. You copy things from your textbook or from a laptop. Again, you're not producing anything. You do a lot of hands-on work, you're not producing anything. So it's very easy to tell, as long as you're not producing anything beyond instruction. The third one is constructive mode, where you're actually generating some new information beyond what was presented. This new information is just additional information. It doesn't mean new to the content domain. So you could be drawing a diagram if one wasn't presented. You could be drawing concept map, and so forth. You could be explaining to yourself. Finally, you could be in the interactive mode, and you're co-generating with a peer, such as debating with each other or co-editing an article or whatever. And what co-generating means is that each partner's output must not only be information beyond the information given, instruction information, also beyond the partner's contribution. So there's two beyond. So ICAP generates a hypothesis based on the subsuming natures of the cognitive processes. So this is the hypothesis I'm making, that the I is much better than C and better than A and P, than P and so forth. So learning decreases across the four modes. Now you notice I put I is much greater than or equal, could be greater or equal than C, which means that I is greater than C only if collaboration is co-generative. Otherwise, I is equal C, and often I could be worse than C. That's because collaboration, about 80% of the time, collaboration is not co-generative. It takes on several other patterns. The C is much, much greater than A because the constructive mode fosters deeper understanding, while the active mode fosters much shallower understanding. And the evidence comes from the fact that students doing constructive mode can answer much more deeper questions during assessment. So what you'll notice is that in this framework, it's very easy for teachers to tell whether students have produced something that's going beyond instruction information or not. But it's much harder to detect in real time whether dialogue patterns are co-generative. So ICAP is an evidence-based theory, and what I mean by that is that there's really hundreds of published studies out there already that support ICAP's predictions. This is before ICAP came along. So these studies typically claim the benefit of certain learning strategies that they have discovered or known about and comparing to another. So I just list two examples. Correcting a concept map, which we now know is constructive, has been shown to be better than reading a text on the same topic. Sometimes you can even read it twice. Well, now we know that's because, it's not because correcting concept per se, but it's because it's a constructive activity. Similarly, studying an incomplete example is also constructive, and that's much better than studying a completed example. And this seems like a very counterintuitive study. How could you learn more from an incomplete example? Well, again, that's because you're being constructive. Okay, we have, most studies I said in the laboratory was done comparing two conditions. We ran a study, my student's PhD thesis, where we compare all four conditions. We ran 4 groups of college engineering students in 4 conditions. The passive condition, they just read the text and, about a concept in engineering. In the active mode, they read and underline. In the constructive mode, they explain a graph that has no text. And in the 4th condition, interactive, they explain the same graph with a colleague, with a peer, sorry. The blue line is a pretest. They all took the same pretest, and the orange line is a post-test. The significant improvement for each condition, within each condition, there's significant improvement. However, there's also improvement across the condition. There's 7% extra gains from the active to the passive, another 11% from the active to constructive, another 9% to go from constructive to interactive. And what you notice is that the last 3 modes is all considered active learning. And in fact, what I'm thinking is that based on the kind of results people get, for example, the latest one published in 2023 in Science, showing that active learning was about 10% better than passive learning for calculus, means that people were probably doing mostly active learning in mode and active learning. Rather than the other 3 modes. So the idea is that what we really should try to push for is the constructive mode. So what I'm going to do is run through very quickly 6 examples of application that's already been in use. So the first example is the easiest one to apply, what I call mind the verbs. So how do you design instructional activities? When we examine over 100 instruction activities designed by K-12 teachers for students, we notice that they typically, obviously, contain a verb, right? So for example, you might say, review the feedback, which now we know is passive. Match similar ones, active. Make up your own reasons, constructive. Exchange ideas, so and so forth. So some verbs clearly elicit generative or co-generative responses, whereas other verbs elicit attentive and manipulative responses. So for example, here's a short list. You can easily tell that the list of verbs on the left is manipulative verbs, and the list on the right is constructive verbs. And now I have a list of 60 verbs for each category. They're very easy to generate. So here's an application potential. Faculties and teachers can easily upgrade their activities simply by changing the verbs that they have for the activities they already designed. So what I'm going to show you is two examples, one from K-12 teacher and one from a college professor. I didn't give them any guidance on how to do this. They just learned about ICAP and they were able to do it themselves. The first example is a typical example in math where you're supposed to choose by filling in the equivalent relationship, right? So you just choose, and that's now we know is active. And the teacher changed it to constructive by create 3 equivalent representations. So that was a very easy change. Second example comes from a college engineering classroom, where again, if you notice, this is just a selection task. You just choose from the options down below to fill in the blank. And the professor changed it to create and explain the change of properties and so on. This third example I'm going to tell you is the one that Jesse Ha in the video yesterday did. He looked at 6 chemistry online courses and looked at the lesson plans and so forth and counted the number of minutes for each kind of activities. And what you notice is that 87% of the time is spent on shallow ways of learning. Okay, this is from real courses that he took, examined from last year. And another example, the fourth example, is how you can, if you understand ICAP, you can avoid adverse changes to use of digital tools. So clickers is a very popular digital tool that you all know about, and typically it has 5 steps that you go through, with one of the critical steps being the pairs talk to each other. But oftentimes faculty delete that pair, perhaps because they think it takes too much time. So basically they reduce it from an interactive activity to just an active. And finally, I have 2 examples about how to easily improve your lectures simply by simple upgrades. So on the left side, I propose there's lots of other ways, but you can simply upgrade your ICAP mode in the context of lecture by things like inserting pauses or ask them to generate a Maria's point, versus improving the content, the clarity, the organization of a lecture. Similarly, how do you choose a strategy to use for your class? Typically, people think about how much class time it occupies or how complex the strategy is. Instead, you should be analyzing what ICAP mode it is. Finally, ICAP enables leading a discussion in real time with constructive versus active questions, because all the teachers have to do in real time is to decide whether the question is asking for additional information beyond instruction or not. And these are actual questions that our teacher has learned to generate by themselves. So instead of asking for describe what we talked about yesterday, you ask for what happened to the mice that have the mutation described. So that's, in summary, ICAP is a parsimonious and simple theory of how students learn. It's yet powerful because it generalizes across domains, activities, and age groups. It's prescriptive with operational definitions based on overt behaviors and outputs that teachers can see, and it differentiates shallow versus deeper learning activities. And finally, it can be translated into a theory of pedagogy and used as a tool in various other ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mickey, for that fascinating introduction to ICAP. Please remain with us. At this time, we would like to invite Professor Carol Chan, Professor Nancy Law, Dr. Gao-Wei Chen, and Dr. Chris Thomas on stage for the second part of this panel. I will introduce each of them as they're coming up. Professor Carol Chan is an honorary professor at the Faculty of Education at the University of Hong Kong. Professor Nancy Law is the Associate Dean of Research for the Faculty of Education and Deputy Director of Center for Information Technology and Education at the University of Hong Kong. Dr. Gao Wei Chen is an Associate Professor of Information Sciences at the Unit of Human Communication, Development and Information Sciences at Faculty of Education. He's also Director of Doctor of Education Program at the University of Hong Kong. Finally, the moderator of the panel is Dr. Chris Thomas. He's the Director of Partnerships at the Yidan Prize Foundation. Before they start their panel, I want to make a kind reminder to ask questions. On the back of your pamphlets, there is a QR code. Please submit all questions there, as we're only taking questions through the QR code. We won't have any stand-up questions. So please, we encourage questions. Take a picture of that QR code to ask your questions. I turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mickey, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm wondering if we can start this panel by connecting back to some of the big challenges that Charles and Joe raised. Young people are going into a world filled with inequality, conflict, climate change, and so forth. How does ICAP help foster the deep understanding that will help them face those challenges?
Well, given the experience COVID, how rapidly the scientist was able to find a vaccine, which is amazing. I think deep learning is really critical. Deeper learning is critical, and we really need to have less failure rates, because what I've been told by our biology department is that once a student who takes the first science course fails that course, they just never re-enter as a science major again. So we want to really reduce failure rate, and I think being able to be more constructive and learn more deeply will help us to end up with more scientists for the necessary problems.
Can't afford to lose anyone.
Right, we can't afford to lose anyone.
So for the many, many problems that we face and to tackle this problem, I'll take our contribution as learning science and cognitive science is to develop our students to become better at learning, to be able to generate new ideas and work together to solve problems. And learning theories like ICAP provided a conceptual framework to achieve this based on learning theory and scientific evidence. Of course, we know that to develop students' capacity, there are many, many educational programs and approaches. To name a few, of course, project-based learning, skill-based curriculum, interdisciplinary curriculum, digital literacy, and many. And they are all valuable because they have this ICAP element of students' active engagement and interaction and teamwork. But we think our learning theories can enrich these approaches, shifting the focus, not just of how you develop this curriculum, teaching tools, but on the focus, like our title, how students learn in this environment. To illustrate, I wonder if you have ever wondered, like, it's the same teaching, it's the same intervention, and yet students vary in what they learn, they vary in what they learn. Of course, some likely candidate could be motivation, emotion, family background, and they are all valid. But we learning scientists have done hundreds of studies, actually I think thousands, all related to ICAP, myself done some, that's shown that students' engagement and how they approach the task, whether it's a passive, active strategy range, predict the differences. And the good news is that these kind of behavior can be taught. And ICAP provides us a unifying framework to help students to engage in this higher level of cognitive engagement with deep understanding to be better prepared. I also want to say one other point about we all talk about we want our student to be problem solver, a creative thinker, collaborator, communicator. And ICAP reminds us that we have to focus on learning for understanding, for deep understanding. So we can enrich this kind of skill approach by looking more at knowledge-skill interaction and integration. so students can really have deep understanding to tackle the challenge. Finally, I really like the interaction at the highest level, for I believe that defines us as human, and we interact to learn. So I hope that in education, even from a young age, students can move away from those individual competitive mindset to interacting collectively, moving forward to tackle problems. So that's my...
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think in today's fast-changing world, students would need more robust learning, that is learning for deep understanding, so they can do critical thinking, as Carol mentioned earlier, critical thinking, problem solving, and communication more effectively. The problem is that the traditional ways of teaching, for example, the authoritative ways, lecturing ways, teaching by telling, so those kind of styles can hardly achieve these purposes. I think ICAP is aligned with those purposes. With ICAP in the classroom, students will have more opportunities to learn actively, to generate new ideas, and to co-construct knowledge with classmates and the teacher. Actually, studies have shown that what students learn from constructive or interactive classrooms are more ready to be transferred to the real world, so they can address the challenges they face more effectively.
So just as Mr. Joe Emmanuel Colomano said earlier this morning, we have so many new challenges. I mean, some of it is really serious challenges to humanity, and there's also the possibilities and challenges that comes with new technology. So how is education going to help our younger generation to generate new solutions effectively? And I would like to, and I think the ICAP actually helps us to think more about, I think probably also in terms of a more integrative way. I'll just give an example. We have generative AI occupying a lot of the attention in the social sphere and in the education sphere. So how are we going to help students to learn about generative AI? Rather than thinking about how to teach them, we at the University of Hong Kong have actually launched and actually completed a generative AI for social good hackathon. We don't, of course, we provide a lot of resources and support, but the focus is on them to join forces with their peers to come up with solutions. One of the solutions was, say for example, it was a team of undergraduate and postgraduate students from law, from business, from communication, and social and computer science. And the problem they wanted to solve was, we are looking at the underprivileged minority groups. How can, and they often do not have the means to provide or to access legal advice to defend their own sort of what they need, or when they are challenged. And what they worked together was to develop a solution that was layered, and so they can get very sort of simple, basic sort of advice first from the system, going forward into actually real people. And to me, that's, and of course, when they finish, when we ask them what they learn, obviously they learn more about generative AI, but they learn about how to cooperate, and they learn how to actually put things into, to create solutions. So in the way that Mickey was talking about, that you have a solution which is generative, which is not what you already have put together. So I think that's a kind of like how we can think about integrating the different kinds of challenges so that students don't just have sort of cut and dry ways of learning, but also having more integrated ways of using the ICAP to help us to, in a way, design learning experiences for students.
So you're really producing a whole different kind of student, right? Not one that's mastered a body of material, but one who's curious,
Yes.
one who's figuring out how to solve a problem, one who's figuring out how to ask questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and they have to go out to the community.
Yeah.
They can't just say, okay, let's do something for them. They need to know what the community needs. So they actually search out to the minority groups that they think they want to serve. And they learn a lot from that as well,
Yeah.
grounded.
And coming up with their own answers to things that
Yes.
we don't know. So when you think about education in Hong Kong as it's been traditionally practiced, what elements of ICAP do you see already in the system, and what would you like to see more of?
Right, okay, yes. Well, that's a very good question. So does Hong Kong have ICAP already or not? I would say it depends on how you look at it. Now, reflecting on the sorts of changes in education in Hong Kong, I would say some elements of valuing the ICAP kind of approach was started around the beginning of this millennium when the Hong Kong government sort of launched a major education reform. And the reform focus was that in order for us to bring about a generation of students who can, in fact, be lifelong learners. So they don't just learn something which is sort of in the textbook, because that's not possible. So what do we mean by lifelong learning? And they need to be able to identify their own learning problems. They need to be able to work with others to search for ways to learn about it, and they need to have ways to know whether they have made some headway in understanding. And so the Hong Kong government, the Education Bureau, in fact, promoted very strongly an approach called self-directed learning. But what is self-directed learning? It can be interpreted in many different ways. So just as what Mickey said, it could be just active learning. So you do something, not just sitting there. But it can still be very varied. So we are trying, so in a way, many of us working in the field of learning sciences have been trying to help teachers and students to work on ways where the students have more agency to define what they want to do, and to be able to reflect and work with each other. But oftentimes, it's not easy to still, if we remain with the term self-directed learning. But with the ICAP, it actually provides a lens that would help us, or teachers, parents, and students, to know, what is the desired way of self-directed learning.
Like what Nancy said, actually the educational reform, pedagogical innovation, teaching and learning improvement, there are many in Hong Kong and in Asia, actually worldwide, that include many of these ICAP elements, constructive, interactive. But I'd say they are more implicit, and we can make it more explicit, systematic, and intentional by it actually helps people to know where you are at and where you can move. To give an example, in Singapore, my PhD graduate, she's working with college instructor, university teachers to reflect on their practice, to look at example and to discuss. So like Mickey's example, but it's on online learning to see if it is constructive or active or how the teacher may go further. I give a college example, but what I really want to share is Hong Kong and Asia system, full of examination, demotivation, memorization that we know about. And this is a tricky point, but I want to say, I think ICAP can help even with this situation. Research in learning, Chinese learner, John Baxter and myself done a bit, is memorization is related to understanding. What does it mean? If you want to memorize something, you need to understand it for you to memorize. However, in school, what happened is rote memorization, pushing at the kid on things that they don't understand. It kills interest, it kills motivation, and that's what we have now. So I am suggesting that, or I'm thinking, conjecturing, that the ICAP framework can help teachers to turn around, to do things in a more constructive, meaning-making way, to let kids see constructive, meaning-making interaction as motivating, that come back the motivation and even learning helplessness. ICAP is a, thanks to Mickey, is a relatively accessible system, not only for advanced projects that we heard about, even in regular classroom. Making small changes can become leverage point to make some changes that people who think I cannot learn may be different. And we may start some starting point to change some of the culture and some different way to support our kids' learning.
So, Gawei, we all love to try a new idea. We love to jump in. Then we start to discover how difficult it can be. How do you think about sustaining changes in teaching practices?
Yeah. So in my projects conducted in Hong Kong, mainland China, and in Asian context, actually I have seen that teachers are willing to make changes to their classroom. And we also have done interventions to classroom teaching, and we observed significant changes to the teaching after intervention. But the problem is that without continuous support, teachers can gradually go back to their original ways of teaching, okay, if there is no continuous support. I think ICAP can provide a powerful yet simple tool for teachers, and they can use ICAP in their daily teaching. Okay? They can personalize it into the teaching to make substantial and sustainable changes. Actually, in Hong Kong and East Asian classrooms, I hope to see more of student-initiated questions, ideas, and solutions. I think that teachers can also encourage students to listen to each other, to engage in their classmates' thinking, and also to build ideas on one another. Yes, I think ICAP can definitely help with that.
Mickey, what are you hearing?
Well, my idea about why things aren't, why some adoption cannot be sustained is because you have to follow it in a sort of script-like way. But with ICAP, you understand what you're doing so that you can adapt it to your own needs. And I think if you can adapt it in a meaningful way based on ICAP, because you now understand ICAP, then you're more likely to sustain it over time. That's what I was thinking.
Actually, to me, the sustaining part is not just at the teacher level, as what Gawei has said, but you need to be looking at the whole organizational level as well as, in fact, the system level. So if we say that, if the ways of learning has to change in the classroom, then teachers have to learn. But what about school leaders, principals, or policymakers? They also need to change. And so what I'm thinking is we need ICAP for professional development and organizational learning.
I like this sustainable point. I myself have been doing different pedagogy, innovation, changes, and sometimes it's like what Gawei said, it's not easy for teachers to maintain it. And script is also, so teachers are always very worried that I have to follow this and then some new thing come again and to follow that. But I think the important thing is, well, ICAP is principles. So you get the key principle. It's a principle, and I think that it's not for only teachers, but educator. You grasp the main principles, and you adapt. You make it flexible, and that is how it can be sustained when you own it, instead of just following a lot of very complicated script. And I do believe that ICAP is a kind of system that is familiar enough. It builds on what teachers are already doing. It's not like they are not doing these kind of things.
That's true.
So teachers have many different choices of the learning methods and practices. How, in your view, does ICAP bring this together into one theory, and how do you know if it's working? How do you know if this is actually fostering a deep understanding among students that we want to see?
Yeah, in my understanding, I think ICAP can support the teachers before class, during class, and after class. Before class, teachers can refer to ICAP to design the teaching. For example, they can plan at what points of a lesson to use what kinds of engagement. During the classroom teaching, of course, teachers can refer to ICAP and also to use the verbs, as Mickey introduced earlier, to guide the engagement. And I think what is great is that the ICAP framework and the verbs can serve as indicators for teachers to know whether and to what extent learning is taking place in the classroom. So teachers can make in-the-moment adjustment and decisions to change the teaching, ongoing teaching. After class, I think the teachers can reflect on their teaching by using ICAP. For example, teachers can use video recordings of their classroom teaching. Teachers can also use student responses, student homework to reflect on the teaching effectiveness, and also to get to know at what levels student learning and understanding taking place.
I think it can also help with assessment. So you can design assessment. In fact, we did do that. We designed assessment questions in which we knew exactly what information was missing from the materials that was given to them, and then see whether they could answer that question, because in order to answer it, you have to be constructive, do some inferences. And that's how we concluded that students who are constructive learn deeply, more deeply, because they were able to answer all these questions where there was missing information in the text. So they had to infer the information. So it can help you design assessment questions too, just based on that simple rule: was the information already given, or was it beyond? So that's how we did it.
So I like what always the free stage and making point about assessment. And I'm again wondering whether you think about your good teachers, other than their good personal qualities. They seem to be the one who can understand where you are at, ask you the kind of question that pitch at the right level, and make you think more and do more. I think ICAP can also help us to have more insight into student learning. And I think teachers should develop more of this capacity in addition to designing, but also assessing and understanding students. So as we talked about, we have verb lists. We can design different activity to elicit their constructive, interactive activity. But at the same time, the teacher should also be reflecting whether is this activity working. It's meant to be in a constructive task. We have many of this in a lot of this project, but students may only be working at an active level or manipulating things, and maybe they are seemingly discussing, but they are not co-generating new idea. So ICAP can provide us a scheme so that we know where we are at, and we can move a bit further in different way. At the same time, seeing whether students are repeating, regurgitating, giving you the kind of information in the textbook, or whether they are putting in their own idea and elaborating. Other than teacher, with the focus on student, I think students themselves, we sometimes think they cannot do this, they cannot do that. Actually, they can do a lot. So students can be put in the role of assessing their own state of ICAP in some way. They can even say that if I am just manipulating information without addition, or I'm adding new things. And in this way, we can also develop students more as metacognitive learner, helping them to become better in learning. And for me, ICAP, I think, has this theoretical insight, but also have actionable guidance. So it's something that we can open up new venue.
So Nancy, we understand a bit, what the teachers should be doing and what do you think the student experience is like? With interactive learning?
I think this is one of the very good points that's brought out. I think we usually do not look enough on that. And when we say we are concerned with how we teach, how we use the method and the tool. When we say knowing the student, we think about the emotional aspect, which are important. But we cognitive scientists think about what we think the student's cognitive understanding and engagement, and they can be enriched at the appropriate level.
We actually, we do look at the students' outputs. Yeah. And what happens is there's not 100% compliance. In other words, you can ask the student to do some constructive tasks, you say, explain this, but they may choose not to explain it, they may choose just to describe it. So if they don't explain it and they just describe it, then they, as a group, will learn less than the group who explained. But the point is, by the teacher asking for them to explain, you're more likely to get explanations from more students than if you didn't. So if you just ask the student to describe, then everyone will describe. If you ask them to explain, a proportion of them will describe. And the proportion that describes will learn not as much as the proportion that explains. So it's still good to try to elicit it, even if you don't get 100% compliance.
Right, okay, thank you. Actually, I really like the idea that ICAP sort of focuses on the students' experiences. But how do we get the teachers who haven't had that experience to actually understand? And so I agree with what Carol said, that a lot of times when we work with the teachers, if they can get the students, they can give the room for the students to be engaged in the constructive and interactive learning, then they were very often surprised by how much the students are able to do. Mm-hmm. So that comes back to the point that I earlier talked about in terms of the teacher professional development, and also how do we get what I would call connected learning between the students, the teachers, the school leaders, and also, say, the funders of those initiatives, which may or may not be the government. So I just want to give an example. We were working with schools on self-directed learning STEM and wanting them to also focus not only on learning about the STEM, but also developing metacognitive capabilities, which oftentimes is now referred to as 21st century skills. So I was very surprised. I mean, during the COVID period, it was very difficult. We're not wanting to push the teachers too much. And so we don't really see too much of what the schools may be doing. And at the end of the year, we had a kind of like an online sharing, and we asked each of the schools to share what they have been doing, or what their plans for the next year was to be. And I was so surprised. One of the schools said, okay, when we talk about 21st century skills, it's so important, it's a primary school. But where do we teach it in our curriculum? We don't have a space for it. So they said, okay, so it's the school leaders who said, okay, if this is so important, and when we have the COVID will go away at some point, so we need to prepare for it. And so what they decided was the whole team of teachers in the school discussed what could be a 21st century school curriculum and how do they do it. And what they came up was a very sophisticated matrix. So they define, say, these are the things which include, say, for example, critical thinking, creativity, and communication, collaboration. And then, say, when they talk about grade 1, grade 2, up to grade 6, what should be in the curriculum? And then they said, okay, 3 teachers in the school would take care of one grade level design. And they think about the curriculum as going through the entire year. So they have sort of more flexible learning time in the afternoon. So each week they have something. And for example, the next year, I saw them, with the 21st century skill. And one of the presentations I saw was the students in 6th grade was working on, the unit was on developing or say investigating soap because, we were all washing our hands so much. And then, so they was finding out how, sometimes you may be sort of actually having rashes or whatever because of washing too much. But what they did was they started with understanding what is soap, how to make soap, and then having the 3D printing for a mold for creating, so for commercializing it. And then they then finish out with the design teachers on packaging, and then the language teachers on developing the sort of specifications and promotional materials. That was so amazing. And the students were so happy because they were able to create something totally new. And I think this cannot be possible without the whole school collaborating. And I can see the ICAP working at the school learning level.
So you don't want to just see the light bulb going off, but you want to see it shining bright. Powerful, right? Yeah. We have an interesting question from somebody in the audience. We talked about shifting the mindsets of teachers and principals and administrators, but what about parents? How do they react to a new style of learning and what they see in their children? How do you bring them on board?
Well, okay. I would say this is an area we need much, much more work on. Some schools are actually paying attention to communicating with parents. And oftentimes, particularly during the COVID period, when some schools sort of went as far as actually creating sort of packages for learning kits for students to come, the parents to go to the school, pick them up, and then to do it at home, and then taking videos. Actually, the families have much more engagement, and I'm not entirely sure whether that kind of engagement of the parents into the children's learning is continuing after COVID. But that kind of connection is very important.
Yes, I also agree. I think a lot more work needs to be done with parents. And we're glad that ICAP is a kind of accessible, almost a little bit intuitive. I don't know whether it's the right word. It's a kind of system that actually can explain to the public quite easily compared to many of these other approaches that we have. And so I think that parents do not want their student to rote learn. They don't want their student, they just push them to study all the time, and it's not what they want. So when there are alternatives, that some small changes that make that you are learning, I go back to my memorization, meaningful memorization, that you memorize with understanding, with meaning, to making sense, not pushing in and yelling at a kid, you're not working hard enough, or paying attention, or worrying. If they can see some new way, new possibility, I think this is a system that can be explained to parents.
Do you see students coming back to parents and having different kinds of discussions with them based on the way they're learning? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for parents, because I'm a parent, I really want to know what is happening in the classroom, in the school. And when my kids come back to the home, I talk to them, like, what did you learn in the classroom? And they would introduce what they learned in the classroom. And I did refer to ICAP to try to do constructive and more interactive talk with my kids. I didn't ask, I didn't just ask, what did you learn? And they answered, I said yes or no, it's great. I keep asking them, how did you learn it? Can you explain it to me? Yeah, I think that works. Yeah.
Actually, I want to say something more about the lack of knowledge and experience with working with parents. We just, our team at Hong Kong U have been sort of studying how parents and schools and teachers, as well as the students, what kind of experiences and outcomes were through that. And one very stark finding we had was the parents were very unsure about parenting, particularly when you have so much digital technology and so on. And what we found was the most unsure parents are the adolescent parents. So primary kids, the parents feel that they are more proficient, they have more self-confidence in being able to help their kid. But what about adolescents? And because they don't know, but on the other hand, when we ask the kids, the students, asking them whether they would like to get support from adults. Now, the fact was, they didn't get too much, but they really wanted, particularly the adolescents. The adolescents also felt unsure about what they do. So I think this is an area that we need more research on.
Mickey, I have a question for you from the audience. It says you went to mainland China years ago. Do you have any plans to start teacher development programs on the mainland again?
I haven't had time to think about that. No, I haven't had time to think about that.
Is this something you're interested in?
Well, our first goal is to develop the professional development module itself and test it out locally to make sure that it's understood, it's clear, and that the teachers or instructors who take our PD can follow through with redesigning the activities. And so that's our first goal. Then we'll be ready to provide facilitated professional development training across the country as well as globally, just maybe half a dozen times just to get feedback. And then ultimately our goal is to disseminate it sort of like in an online fashion that's not facilitated in person, so it can reach many more people.
Maybe just to conclude, can we just go around and your quick reactions? What do students and teachers like about ICAP? What do they find most appealing? What do they find most difficult also?
Yeah, actually, I did a study on this, but not exactly on ICAP. It's related.
Active learning, yeah.
Yeah, active learning. So when teachers use constructive or interactive engagement, when teachers orchestrate this kind of engagement in the classroom, students tend to enjoy more about the classroom teaching. They tend to be happier in the classroom teaching and to have less anxiety in the classroom. And also they tend to engage with other students more often in the classroom. So you can see the chain effect. Like if teachers use constructive, interactive engagement, students feel happier, and also they tend to engage with other students more actively in the classroom. And yes, all of this can increase their learning in the classroom. I think both teachers and students will like that.
Yeah, and I think my experience tells me that it's most important for the teachers themselves to be given ICAP, the constructive and interactive type of learning experiences, as I don't like the word, in some sense, professional development, because it sort of have a connotations that the teachers are on the sort of receiving end. I would like to think of them as teacher learning or professional learning. And so I don't think that we should be giving teachers on a sort of silver plate that this is what would work, please take it. But more like principles, and then they can try things out. They need to try, and then they might be surprised at how the trying actually gets them to do something different. And also, we always want the teachers to be able to work with each other and collaborate. It's not only the interactive part for the students, but it's also in an institutional context. I mean, there's always a risk in doing something different. When you collaborate, when you have other people working together with you, the risk is sort of shared.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're making them construct it by practicing it themselves, right?
I like what Guowei said. If you ask teachers, parents, or public, or student, they like constructive and interactive mode. They all like it, they enjoyed it. However, that is not happening in school because of examination. So in our teacher program, Hong Kong U, we do, and they will, and any kind of teacher learning experience, or PD if you use the word, they will say that we like these constructive, interactive, and not ICAP yet, but this activity, but we don't have time to finish our syllabus, our curriculum, and we need to do that. But I think that what I see the promise of ICAP is it's not so much like an overhaul, like the teacher thinking that you have to do a very major project in taking up 2 weeks of my time. I think we have to work with the curriculum, work with the constraint, and ICAP provide a kind of sustainable and scalable and a kind of more small-scale change that may fit into the school ecology. And like what Nancy said and emphasized, we talk a lot about classroom, but this kind of changes need to be systemic. So many of my teachers taught will say that it's very difficult for me to implement any of these things in school. I feel I'm a loner. So I also think that while we focus on student level, it's not that the systemic level of classroom, school, and wider level and society level. I think that these also may are working together, but there's some possibility of small change, integrating it with the curriculum, working with meaningful memorization in some different way to maybe to work on some of this difficulty.
Any last words? So I want to thank the panel. I want to thank Mickey for helping us all understand a unifying theory of active and interactive learning. And I want to thank all of you for helping us understand how it's applied and how it's thought about and modified across many different cultures. It's been a terrific conversation. And thank you for being here with us today.